Okay.
Okay.
It should be recording now, eh?
I think so.
Okay. And now I have to hit the button for Chrome. Okay, so let's get going. Okay, so finally got to teach a lecture here in this beautiful summer school. Okay, today we talk about crowdsourcing, and how many people have used crowdsourcing for annotating a data set so far? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so for some of you it would be news. So let me give you an historical perspective to start with. From the 70s, there were 2 points of view on how to solve computer vision problems. The prevalent one was based on engineering, and it was the left one, where, as you can see from the diagram, here 2 people are Fischler and Schwager, trying to build a face detector in images. And they say we have to find the eye, the nose, and the mouth. So we have to build by handcraft mechanisms that we go around an image and look for eye-like structure, nose-like structure, and so on. And then in order to know that it's really face and we're not deluding ourselves, like an eye could be a dark spot, like my buttons here, whatever, then we have to enforce the fact that all of these parts come in the right mutual arrangement with respect to each other, hence those springs that keep things together, right? So here is one idea, a little bit like building a bridge. And so you can build a bridge by putting a span on pillars, or you can have a suspension bridge, or you can have other arrangements. So there are many ways you can achieve a goal. Engineers know which ones go well in each circumstances. And so here, it was an attempt to build a face detector. And more or less simultaneously, there was a different line of literature that depended on looking at how the brain does it, or at least thinking about how the brain might do it. And Fukushima is the best known name. He came up with the idea of the cognitron and the neocognitron, where you have different layers, like in brain cortex, and these are connected in a genetic way. And then you tweak parameters by using certain examples in order to obtain the performance or the behavior you want. Now, it turns out at the time, they didn't know some very simple things like backpropagation. What was it mentioned here? Backpropagation, people learn about. And so Fukushima was ultimately unsuccessful in convincing people that that was the right way to go. And so most of computer vision, when I joined the field, was working in the engineering camp, trying to come up with clever ideas on how to capture image structure and how to detect it, reveal it, and so on. Now, we know how it went. So these are schematics of the same idea. On the left is an approach that is not practiced any longer, where there is a designer producing some clever algorithm to resolve some issue. On the right, you let the data speak for itself. And so you have a generic piece of software. Here I wrote learning that will tune some architecture and make it do whatever we want. And that's based on example data, okay? Now, the right-hand side is disappointing from an engineer's point of view, because the engineer loses control of what goes on and doesn't know what's going on, in fact. But in practice, it's great because most of the tasks we want to solve in vision are not informed by geometry or photometry or physics. They're informed by phenomena that are too complex to model and describe. And so showing do like this type of examples maybe works best. Now, this picture omits a dirty secret, which is that actually there are probably between 10,000 and 100,000 smart people around the world who are tweaking those architectures and coming up with new ideas. So there is a lot of design behind the scenes. And once you're done with designing, then you let the data say what it wants to say. But since we can choose between different designs, as we saw this morning, truly there is a lot of hand intervention. It's not really data speaking and everybody else listening.
And often this is covered by a little fig leaf like this. Okay, so so we're now where we are, thanks to three trends in technology. And so the one that we mostly focus on in this class is the one that from neuroscience we got deep networks, and deep networks were there in their current form, more or less, in the late 80s, early 90s. But then two pieces of the puzzle were missing. So one was Moore's law, which was producing ever better computers, more powerful by doubling the number of transistors on a chip every 18 years. That's what Moore's law says. And at some point, those computers became fast enough that it could train really large deep networks, and so real experiments could be tried. And so the last piece of the puzzle to fall into place was large, well-annotated data sets, which were not available until the early 2000s because people didn't have access to large image data sets. But finally, through the internet, we could write crawlers to download them on our computers. And people didn't have access to large pools of other people who could annotate quickly these data sets. And so in the early 2000s here at Caltech, we were collecting data sets painfully by hand without writing crawlers because we didn't even know how to write them, painfully collecting data sets from the internet. And then we would hire undergraduate students to annotate them. And it would be a pain in the neck because you would have to find them, to motivate them, to make sure that they come back and do a job and so on. So Amazon Mechanical Turk in 2005, 2006 was the first infrastructure that allowed us to crowdsource on a large scale annotations. And so what used to take months or maybe years to annotate a data set became a matter of a day or two. So the challenge was we wanted to have more and more images. This is a picture taken from the COCO paper, which is a paper that proposed an large annotated data set for the community. And here you see through the years what data sets we dealt with. And so on here is maybe the first one. It came out here at Caltech. And the student involved was Fei-Fei Li, who then collected ImageNet that you know and you love and you've used, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so there are these crowdsourcing platforms where you are the scientist, you define a task, you post it online on a platform, and there the platform is shown as AMT, Amazon Mechanical Turk, but there are many other ones that are probably better today. You pay annotators, and then people from all over the world, they connect with the platform. They find your task, they annotate your images, and then they're done, and you get the annotations, and everybody goes home happy, right? They get the money, you get the annotations. It's a fair deal. And how do you choose one of these platforms? I will not discuss this today, but you have to go by word of mouth, run your little tests. Some platforms are more managed than others. Amazon Mechanical Turk is completely unmanaged, so anyone who shows up can annotate your images and get paid. In other platforms, there is quality control, and so it's a matter of sort of expenditure versus accuracy type reasoning. Okay, so let's go through a number of annotations that you will face and you've gone through maybe already, just to know what they are. The most common one is single label classification. And so for an image, you have a set of you define a set of possible labels, and the annotator has to pick one out of many. Right? That's very simple. Now, you could try to pile on more work on annotators. This is a case in a recent paper where somebody wanted to annotate facial expression. And by the way, I'm putting as much as I could a little clip of the paper's headers on the slide so that you know where to look if you're interested. And so here each line is a different facial expression, and you can choose how strongly is it expressed. And so you have to choose one click per line. Okay, so each line is a multi-label, it's a single label classification, but you do it multiple times in one GUI. So this is a case in which, to be fast and efficient, many tasks are put on a single slide. Whether this is a good thing or not, you have to know by experiment. Now, to generalize a little bit, there is multi-label classification, which means the same as keywording. For a given image, there are many keywords that may apply. And so this person could simultaneously be young and with medium hair and gender, I don't know what to say, male, cis male, and the accessories may be spectacles, etc., okay? And so you keyword the image and many possible labels apply. Now to move on, here is a slide taken from an experiment we did in the early days to see if we could label quickly all the taxis that you find in Manhattan. So we downloaded from Google Images, from Google Maps, all the pieces of Manhattan maps that or Manhattan top-level photographs, and we asked our annotators to click on all the taxis they saw. And so here, each location, each click is one location. And what you should see here is that it's not one single click per image. It's any number of clicks between 0 and 100. We put an upper bound at 100, right? Now, so this leads into something I'll talk about in 10 minutes, which is the question of the load of the annotators. And it's good to even it out. And so here you might find yourself not seeing any taxi, and so you move on. Or you might find yourself in a situation where you see 20 taxis and you've got to click on each one of them. And so an annotator will feel a little bit rotten when they get an image with lots of taxis. They prefer the ones with few. And so they will be tempted to skip ahead. And so just annotate 2 or 3 for you and feel like, okay, I'm giving them a fair deal because I'm not supposed to annotate all of them or something like that. And if you have one of these uneven tasks, the tendency is for annotators to prefer the lower level of effort. And so you find yourself in trouble. And so how do you deal with this? And so we can talk about it in a moment. Okay. Yet another annotation you're very familiar with is bounding boxes. And here you see some instructions to the right, which are important, and I'll get to them in a moment. Bounding boxes might have an orientation, and so you ask them to not only draw the box, but also rotate it until it's just right. Now, going even more sophisticated, here is a skeleton or key points where you have a bird or you have a bison, and you want to see all the joints or the main key points on the body. And so you've got to find a way to make it easy for the annotators to remember what are they clicking next. And so maybe it could go by colors, or it could go by some little schematics on the side that lights up to show what should you label now. And you have to make it easy for people to remember what is it that they're doing. Now, here is another picture from Coco that shows you how the same image might be annotated in completely different ways, depending on what you want to achieve. And so on the top left, you have image classification. This is one of those multi-label classifications where 3 labels were used, but somebody could have even written grass, if allowed, and hat and whatnot, and dog. Well, dog is there. Second one is object detection localization. So it's bounding boxes, which are colored depending on the category of the object. And bottom left is what is called semantic segmentation. You've seen it. And so every pixel should be labeled depending on what is the quality or the type of category that the pixel is on top of. But the trouble is that that annotation does not separate out individual objects. And so on the right, you have bottom right instance segmentation in which all of the above are true, namely, not only you know which category it is, not only you know which object it is, but you also know which pixels are the good ones. It's not a bounding box. And then maybe the most complex type of annotation is image captioning. And here you've got to write sentences describing what you see. Okay? Why do you get so agitated? Okay. And by the way, the guy who's not me is Grant Van Horn, who is the hero who did image iNaturalist and Merlin Bird ID. Okay. So these are all sorts of annotations that you want to collect. Now, the trouble is that you're not doing it yourself. You're having other people do it. And so there is a bit of a complicated situation here. So you're producing raw data, you're putting together, curating whatever, a set of raw data. And you want to send the raw data for learning, and you need annotations. And so you want to show the raw data to annotators so that they produce those annotations, and then you can have supervised learning as a result. And the question is, what do you tell the annotator so that they do the right thing? And it has to be both informative and clear, and yet very quick to consume, because the annotators have no patience. So you have to think about someone who has the attention span of TikTok or whatever is the current favorite app on the web. Okay, on the phones. Okay, so how do you do it? And so the first thing to do is you have to have clear instructions. And so what you will see now is a progression of ideas on what instructions we want. And so suppose that here we want to get bounding boxes around people. And so draw a box around people. That seems to be clear enough. So now you can send it to the annotators, go home, have dinner, have cake, go to sleep. The next morning, everything is done and wonderful. But then you wake up and you get something like this, which is not what you wanted, because you wanted to have individual boxes around each person, because you want to build a person detector. Oh my God, yeah, I get it now. They misunderstood me. And so draw a box around each person. And so you might get something like this. And so on the right, I didn't mark them down, but you get it. Oh, you say, oh my God, well, the boxes on the left are very loose and they're not tight around the persons. And on the right, they're drawing boxes around people in paintings, which is not what I'm looking for. Or there could be some reflection in a pane of glass, or there could be some poster with people, but you want the people, the real people in the picture. And so that's not what you meant. And so what do you do? Draw a tight box around each person, and now you get tight boxes there. That's good. But now you want to avoid having the people in the painting to be done. And so draw a tight box around each person that you see clearly and is real. And maybe that works. And now and then you want all the visible parts, because maybe the guy on the left has an arm outside the box, and that's a decision you have to make. It's a painful decision because you don't know which one is the right one. Should they have annotations just to take the body, or should they also include the arms? Well, you've got to decide at some point, and you've got to let your annotators know. And it's better to have them be consistent on the wrong decision than have them be completely inconsistent and do whatever comes to mind, et cetera, et cetera. And typically then you want to show them a bunch of examples or images that might be ambiguous on what's right and what's wrong. And how do you decide which images are most ambiguous? Well, the way to do it is you run small tests, first on yourself, and then on your two friends around the corner in the next office. And then you use 10 annotators on 100 images, and then you use 10 annotators on 1,000 images. And as you go along, you look in detail to all the annotations you've got, and you say, okay, this is not right. What can I say that is a short sentence, it's clear, and it will get the right results? And so the places where people are most confused those images are the ones you want to show them with correct, incorrect, because sometimes the only way to show people is by example rather than a clever wording. Any questions? Okay. Okay, we talked about cognitive load on annotators and how to even it out, and it's pretty clear that the difficulty of images can change very much from image to image, even within the same data set. And so in what ways can things change? Well, sometimes if you look for humans, these are both easy to see and easy to annotate. You spot them immediately, and it's clear how to put bounding boxes around them. Sometimes they're easy to see, but they're difficult to annotate. So in this case, you might find that once the annotators have put down, so first of all, they have to guess the parts they don't see. And then once they put down 2 or 3 boxes, they've put so much clutter on the image. They don't know what they're doing any longer because they don't see what is underneath any longer. So you have to think about how to do it. And we'll see a little trick in a moment. Sometimes it's difficult to see and easy to annotate. And so you have to think about, how do I deal with this? And so difficult to see means you will have a low recall, namely annotators will fail to notice most of the times. And so one thing you may need to do is to show the same image to 10 annotators and not even have them draw a bounding box, just focus on detection and put a click, whatever they think the object is. And if any annotator has found something, that's better than nothing. And so one annotator only out of 10 finding something, like in Where is Waldo, is good enough to say, okay, then I'll blow up the image around that click, and I'll have annotators pay attention there and draw bounding boxes there. And so this theme of splitting a single task into a sequence of micro tasks is a very good thing to think about, and you will see an example soon. And then sometimes it's difficult to see and difficult to annotate, right? And so you have to think like the annotators would see it. What do I do? What do they see? What is difficult? How do I make it easy in some way? Okay, and so, okay, now that we've seen how these things can vary, we have to even out a cognitive load. And so here I could say draw a tight box and so on. It's all clear, but here they have to work hard because there are 8 people, 7 people, and they're blocking each other out. There are the shadows and so on. So it's a lot of work. And different images present different amounts of work for the annotators. And they love it when they find an image when there is nothing. And once they found an image where there is nothing, they start ignoring things that they should be seeing, but they pretend not to see. So how can we make it easier? And so the easiest possible task is just a single mouse click. Boom, right? So one thing you may do is to split the task we saw before of putting bounding boxes around these people into a sequence of 3 or 4 steps. The first is you show them the picture and you ask them to guess how many people are there. Very simple. So if you're guessing, they're helping you bin your collection into groups of images which contain roughly the same number of events or birds or people or whatever it is that you're annotating. So once you've done that, then each one of those blocks or collections will present an even cognitive load, or much more even than the initial one. And now if they always have either 3 or 4, then they get into a nice routine of, okay, it's either 3 or 4, it's like a little dance, and we can go with it. And you pay them more than the ones who get nothing or 1 item, right? And so there is a sense of fairness. They do it, they get into the groove. Now, once you have divided them up, what's the next task? And so the single mouse click is the simplest. And so once we have, oh, sorry, let me go back a little bit. So here, how do we bin numbers? And so you have to decide how you bin numbers. Typically, there are very few images with tons of events. And so you see that here it's 25 or more. Well, there will be some set of annotators who get those 75 images that have a lot of items, and you pay them a lot. And so they're happy, but they know that they're onto a difficult task, right? So you don't need to divide 25, 26, 27 into different bins. Okay. So here, you want to know roughly where the people are without overdoing it. So no bounding box, which takes maybe 6 or 7 seconds, one click, which takes 1 second. And you have them click on all the heads. And now you know where all the heads are. And so what you can do is now you can present to annotators have to put down bounding boxes, just 3 dots on 3 heads, and say put bounding boxes around the people who are marked with a cross. And they know they will find 3. And so why do we do this? Well, first of all, the annotators don't have to work too hard on that single image. And there will be some other annotator to whom you present different heads to be annotated. And second, you can space out those dots so that when they put down their bounding boxes, they don't overlap and they don't get confused by overlapping bounding boxes. Okay. And so they give you these 3 boxes, and then other annotators will do the other boxes, and you're fine. And then you have to think about annotation consolidation. So as we will see, it's always good to have more than one annotator annotate a given image. And the first reason why you want to do that is that you want to know how consistent your annotators are. If you have annotated a data set, but you do not know the quality of the annotations that you find, then you're in tough S. Because you don't know what's the quality, and so you don't know what to expect. You know, if my model is not working, maybe the annotations are horrible. And so if you have, if you can look at the difference between different annotators, you can draw precision recall curves of one annotator with respect to the other, and you can see what is the best that you could expect from your model given the quality you have on your annotation. That's the first reason. The second one is that by looking at patterns of annotations, you can also get a measure of the confidence you have on each annotation being correct. And so you might find something like this in a certain set of annotations. And then you have to use some grouping algorithm that decides that the red boxes go together, the blue together. And I will not cover this, but there are algorithms for grouping, and you will, like k-means clustering and so on. And so that's a different story. Once you group them, you see what is the spread of annotations around each one. And so you can come up with a level of confidence, which is based on how many boxes have been annotated, how many annotators saw that box, first of all. And the second one is how consistent it was. And so you can come up with some level of confidence, and that may be fed into a learning algorithm, telling it, okay, I'm giving you this ground truth, but my confidence is 0.9, not 1. And so the algorithm will make use of that. Okay. Now, it's a little aside, some comment I made the other day. When you annotate a test set, it's not the same as annotating a training set. And I want to show you one example. There's a paper by Pietro from about 10 years ago. And it was about pedestrian detection. And so we decided to have the annotators produce 2 bounding boxes in this case. And so you see them here. And so one bounding box was, imagine that you could see the whole body of the pedestrian. Where would it be? And so this is this box. I don't know if people see my, yeah, you see my pointer no matter which screen you look at. And then put a bounding box around the visible part of the pedestrian, okay? So then we knew how much signal there was for the algorithm to make use of. And we could also analyze how frequently pedestrians were occluded, the feet were occluded, or the top was occluded, or feet and head were occluded. And you see here frequencies of occlusion, so we could see how difficult the data set was, et cetera, et cetera. And here we also analyzed how big the pedestrians would be with respect to the distance from the camera. And so here you have the distance in meters from the camera, and here you have the height in pixels of the pedestrian. And here you could see how frequently pedestrians had a certain size, so that we knew how much data was the algorithm getting about the different sizes. And so we could compensate for the missing ones if we wanted to. And so this is something that I would encourage all of you to do, which is not only have the data annotated and you're done, but also based on annotations, analyze how frequent is each phenomenon that you see. How often do you see a bird facing left versus facing right versus facing you? How big is the bird and so on? So you have a sense. And then in the test set, if it's annotated this way, you can measure performance. And here, these are, yes.
So I had a question. So we're looking at the inclusion of the bounding boxes. What happens, say, like one you might see in ecology, you've got herd of zebras, and so like the zebra could be included by another zebra. And so does that add a layer of complication because you've still got the same class within the included bounding box?
Right, so that's a great question. My guess is you don't need to annotate it explicitly because you have all the annotations for the zebras in your picture. And so there is something called the ground plane constraint, which typically works. And it is that if I look at objects that stand on a flat plane, as the plane recedes from me, it goes up in the image. And so the zebras that are closest to you, their feet are lower in the picture. And so the bounding box should be larger and lower, and the zebras that are behind should have the bottom of the bounding box a little bit higher, and on average it should be slightly smaller. So for all the bounding boxes that intersect, you should be able to guess with 95% accuracy which one is in front. And then you know which ones are blocked and by how much. And then you can estimate how difficult each case is.
Yeah.
But yes, but this type of reasoning is perfectly valid whether or not the blocker is a car in the street or it's another animal in the field.
Do you train your model on the bounding box to only the visible component, or would you take the entire estimate?
Okay, so this is the typical reasoning you have to make when you are training an algorithm, which is you have to think about, okay, what do I want and why do I want it? And you shouldn't be dogmatic of everybody has bounding boxes, so I want bounding boxes. You should say, well, why do I want bounding boxes? Maybe I want them because I want just to count the zebras. And then maybe detecting the heads is good enough, but maybe you don't get enough signal. So that's a trade-off. Or maybe detecting the feet or some other part of the body. If you want to estimate their size, then maybe a bounding box is also a good idea. And now you would like the algorithm to make the same inference that you make, which is even if the zebra is blocked out, it should guess the size. And so at that point, you decide, yeah, I want to go for a real bounding box where we guess the real size of the zebra. And then what you may do is I also want to have bounding boxes for the heads. And I want to verify that my counts of the heads and the bigger bounding boxes correspond, which they will never, but you can see how often they do, etc. And so think of what you want to achieve and then collect those annotations. And then you will have to be creative, as we say, namely, there may be different algorithms that get to the end. So here are different performance curves. And so here it's miss rate at the top and false positive rate miss rate along the y-axis and false positives along the x-axis. And so the best performance is down in the lower left corner. And these were experiments done pre-deep networks in 2011. Paper was published in 2012. So just at the bleeding edge before deep networks. And today, luckily, the performance of automobiles in detecting pedestrians is much better. But you see that some curves, like this one, are bad, and some are good, some are easy, very low error rates, coming down this way. And so why? Well, because these are only the near scale pedestrians, and this is the mix of all, and those are the medium scale, and then small ones. Okay, so we didn't even do the small scale. But the one with occlusions are much worse than the one without occlusion. So now you can see what the problems are. Like clearly here, if somebody had to pick this up to make it better, they would want to work day and night on smaller pedestrians and occluded pedestrians. You should ignore the big ones. So if you want to go and capture more data, just annotate the small ones. Don't care about the other ones. So this is a lesson on the point that just don't look at the soup of numbers and average them to one number. Try to understand what's going on. Okay. Now, another question is, what if you have continuous values you're trying to estimate? And sometimes, like with a click of a mouse, well, the mouse is in a continuum, X and Y, but sometimes it's not so easy. For example, if you want to estimate, like here, the skin tone of this person, and here, and it's a paper by Balakrishnan. The idea was to use, instead of using a continuous scale, so using a cursor, make it quick and take the Fitzpatrick scale, which is used by dermatologists. And so it's a combination of a patch that shows you the skin tone, the number, and then a description. Okay, so these three elements together has an annotator decide which one of those boxes to pick on the right. Okay. Now, what do you do at this point? So you've transformed your continuous variable into a discrete variable. So somehow you've lost information because the continuous variable could take any values, and here you only have 6 values. But then you send it to annotators, and here we have a bunch of faces that are morphing one into the other. And the annotators for each one of them, so pay attention, -6 label refers to leftmost image, -5 to the second leftmost, and so on. And here you have the spread of values that the annotators have chosen. So I've scattered them a little bit along the x-axis to show them all. And I've added a bit of noise also this way so they don't overlap. But these 3 are olive, these 2 are medium, these 4 are fair. Now what you can do is you can, for example, spline through or regress a curve, in this case, because I know that these images are related, or you can compute the median, or you can discard the top 2 and the bottom 2 and then compute the mean of the rest in order not to be affected by annotations that are crazy and really out of filter, like here is one. So if you average out all the annotations, this one would pull everything up by a lot. So it's always good to discard the top and bottom or top 2 and bottom 2. And you see that here with 9 annotators, you can get a very nice regression of what the underlying values are. So we go back to an estimate in the continuum. Now, how would you do hair length? And so, of course, you have to translate this into an ecology question. But again, the same idea. And so you give the annotators only 5 choices, but you explain to them what they mean in different ways. And so you try to find angles to which somebody can understand what you want. Okay, so these instructions are the result of maybe a week of trial and error, thinking about it and seeing what works and what doesn't work. Any question? And so here you see the curve. This was gender, estimating the gender. And here you see that there is a transition point, more or less here. So here you have annotators who are leading the curve in some way, stuff that are trading. If you want to, again, be robust with respect to outliers. Okay, so now another thing that happens that you have to be aware of is when you ask annotators to annotate, especially continuous variables, but even discrete variables that are related to each other, you may find yourself in 2 different situations. There are situations in which they all agree, like here. So all the votes are for high intensity of happiness, for this particular picture, and low intensity of angriness, surprise, sadness, and so on. But there are some situations where the votes are highly spread out. That means that either the annotators don't get it what you want, or the image is genuinely ambiguous. Now, if you plainly average the votes that you get from the annotators, you will never know whether the votes are all spread and you're getting 0.5, because that's the mean of votes, or whether there was a very consistent 0.5 rating of this particular quantity. That makes a huge difference, because if this is the way it goes, then you shouldn't hold an algorithm to any particular answer. You know, any answer they give you should be okay. While if the agreement was for 0.5, it should be really serious with the algorithm. You've got to give me 0.5 on this one when you train, right? Okay, suppose that this is another example. So here there is an entropy computed that tells you numerically how much this agreement is, so that the detail doesn't really matter. Now, something that you might imagine is that, is this a 1 hour or 1 hour and a half lecture? 1 hour. So the annotators are different in their behavior. So there's a picture from the COCO paper. And here you see what we get from annotators, the blue ones, who are out on mechanical Turk. So anyone can do it. Versus the authors of this paper, these are the red dots. And so the precision, I recall, much better for the authors of the paper. Here the task was to find some difficult to find object in images. And so clearly, we trained ourselves to be very careful, and that was not the case for the annotators. And here, actually, this series of dots is what you obtain not from different annotators, but by combining 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, different annotators. And you get higher recall because between them, they detect many objects. So then you also incorporate quite a bit of noise, and so your precision goes down. And that was the overall behavior of the annotators and like that. The diameter of the dots means how many of them were at that level. So you see that there is a spread, and here is another plot from a different paper. And here the question was a binary classification: is this bird an indigo bunting or a blue grosbeak? And so you see that the correct rejection and correct detection of the annotators, each annotator is a dot, are very different one from the other. Here you have the difference between mechanical Turk workers and citizen scientists on a bird species classification. And you see that the histogram of score is much lower for the outsourced annotators than for the citizen scientists. And so the trouble is that you don't find many citizen scientists who are willing to work for you, but you find a lot of annotators. And so in this paper, you will find all the trade-offs between the error rates and the annotation time you gave to different populations, and how much it costs you, and so on. Let me skip. Okay, so here I'm going to get for 2 minutes into something that is somewhat equation heavy. And it is for you just to know that this thing exists. And the idea is that if you have many annotators, and if the annotators are not all behaving the same way, some of them are more prone to false alarms and some more prone to false rejects. If you're able to estimate the behavior of each annotator, namely what goes on in the head, and then you combine the scores, not by majority voting, but by giving the correct weight to each thing they tell you, then you estimate things much better than any other way. And so the task was, again, to decide if it was an indigo bunting, and I'll flip through slides a little bit fast. So this is the curve you saw. And these curves are error rates, where you count a correct detection and a correct rejection equally. And so the best people are top right, and then there are people who just don't know what they're doing. And there are people who are optimists. They always say yes, so we get a fantastic detection rate, but their correct ejection rate is in the toilet. And pessimists, the opposite. And then there are people who do the opposite of what you want them to do, and so on. So if you can estimate that somebody is always flipping the bit, then then they give you a signal. Then they turn out to be your friends, but you've got to understand what they're doing. And so, okay, maybe I shouldn't show you this. So the bottom line, which you get reading the paper, let me skip it, is that the following, that there is a model, and this picture depicts a statistical model of what goes on in the head of the annotators, where the only thing you measure is the label that on image I annotator J gave you. That's the only thing you measure, and then you know which annotator saw which image. These are the only things you know. But you estimate a lot of stuff, namely how difficult is that specific image, how much noise is there in the head of that specific annotator, and what are their biases. And if you can estimate all of these things, then you do a great job. And this is a secret sauce in iNaturalist, where each one of us working with a naturalist estimates how well we know each task. And then based on that, our vote gets incorporated and the decision is made. Okay, let's say this is somewhat advanced stuff. Let me skip this. Okay, so maybe I'll show you this one. So here you ask them to classify, is there a duck in the image? And here, artfully, we constructed a data set that had geese and grebes and nothing. And this picture shows you that based on all the annotations, we can work out the fact that some annotators are able to, so these lines are the separators or the discriminators with the annotators having the head, which we estimate. Some annotators are able to separate out the two types of ducks from everything else. So then some annotators put the grebes together with the ducks, and some annotators, big one, put in the geese, the grebes together with the ducks. And so from this, we know that there are three schools of thought in the set of annotators, and so we can make use of all of this information to do a good job. But this is somewhat advanced, and it's not really worth for you to remember in detail. Just remember, okay, last topic. So you remember the class we had from Ambari last week? And so this picture struck me because it poses the following problem. If I wanted to crowdsource the task of discovering how many species there are here, what would I do? And so the problem is, I don't know, because I've sent down my submarine. I don't know how many species there are. I don't want to be the one who does it. That's why you want to crowdsource the task. But I can say nothing to the annotators because I don't know what species there are. So I don't know what to tell them, how to look for it. So how do we resolve it? And so this was another picture. And here is me a month ago, 2 months ago, on the Dolomites, walking around and noticing how many flowers there are. And in that season, and so how many species of flowers are there? And so these are pictures I took. And of course, I submitted them to a naturalist to know which species there were. And let me see if I pulled out the microphone. So what do I do here? Well, the flowers are somewhat distinctive, and so you start getting an idea of how you might do the task. And so let me illustrate it with other pictures I was taking of bumblebees coming to some lavender bushes near my house. So again, how many species do we see here? And some of you may know at a glance how many there are. You may do, does anyone here know how to name these species? No, okay, that's good. I feel less stupid. Okay, so the idea is to work on similarity. So you don't know what to tell them to do in terms of identifying species. So what you can tell them is try to group together animals or plants that look similar. And that would be signal for you, right? And so you can tell, so you can build a GUI where you give them some color on the top right, and then you say, click on one color, whichever you want, and use that color to click on all items that look related, and then pick another color, and again, repeat, and so on. And so it might look something like this. So those three look somewhat related, or four, and the other ones maybe look somewhat related. So now, the problem with this is that different annotators will have different opinion on what looks related. Like suppose that you had human faces and you say group faces according to the ones that are related. Well, somebody might group based on gender, somebody based on race, somebody based on age, facial expression, happy or sad, direction in which the face looks, and so on. So how do you work this out? And you cannot ask them what you're doing, because they may not know themselves. Or if they write it, then you're facing with, hundreds or thousands of different sentences, and how do you group them together? You don't know. So the idea is to have the machine work for you. And so what, in this case, I thought that maybe some people would figure that some of these bumblebees are hairy and some are smooth. So they might group them this way. And some may figure out that the thorax is tan, or it may have a dark spot on it. And that may be another grouping principle that I can pay attention to. And those are very clear principles that somebody may think of and use. So how do you think about what went on? And so the way to think about it is the following. You might have 3 species, for example. I believe that there are 3 species there. And these 3 species may look different in ideal embedding space, which takes into account all the things you could say about them. But the annotators will pay attention to one thing at a time. And so it's like having a high-dimensional space that gets projected down onto one dimension. Like annotator A may pay attention to the thorax. And so all the points are projected down onto that dimension. Is the thorax tan or black? And annotator B may pay attention to hairy versus smooth. And annotator C may pay attention to everything, or to a dimension that reveals the differences between the 3 species, etc. And so you will find, if you're interested in this one, there is another paper that came out about 12 years ago called crowd clustering that explains exactly how to solve this. And the idea again is to have a statistical model like before, first to estimate what is in the state of annotators from the pattern of answers we give you, and tries to work out an embedding space where these properties are represented. And so you can come up with proper categories at the end. And so there are a few experiments you find in the paper that maybe I'll skip. Okay, so we're done. And so these are some of the challenges we talked about, and some of the best practices that you may follow. And now for questions. Yes.
Curious, because we talked about model ensembles this morning, and it feels like there's a lot of similarities here. Like, I'm curious if you have worked on, or if you know of work trying to model the uncertainty of different imperfect models in the same way that you would.
I see. I'm not aware, but since the space of papers published is infinite, there might well be. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
In Brett's clustering work, you had people and machine learning models that sort of got. There was only one machine learning model, and then a bunch of people. But like you had a computer vision model that got to like also vote and was also estimating this to that guy, treating like a human.
Yeah, but you're right. Because, yeah. So what I'm thinking going on, so this seems to be very useful, because one thing that strikes me is when you train an algorithm and it does 85% correct and a human does 95% correct, you wonder, okay, what's the difference? Or maybe both humans and algorithm do the same level of correct. But maybe the algorithm picks out some details that the human cannot, or vice versa. It must be that way. And so I guess looking at a pattern of correct and incorrect answers, you should be able to group out cases that are easier for humans, easier for the algorithm. And so you should be able to estimate an embedding where these are laid out. And so you can predict when something, a new example is going to be easier for a human and send it to human, maybe. That sounds like nice work, nice thing to put out.
So psychologists, when they build questionnaires and stuff, pay a lot of attention to the order you should present options to the person.
Yes.
You think of this when you build your
Yeah, but I have nothing intelligent to say. So, I mean, there was that case of the facial expressions in which was clear, right? That who knows how the order influences the.
Do you play around with it?
No.
There are higher level work, I think, in crowdsourcing that do really look at this type of thing, but not the work.
No, so okay, so in this paper, part of the story was, okay, we can ask about all of these facial expressions, but then we find that there are 6 that are predictive of everything else by combining them. And let me see if I remember. Okay. So sad, like happy and angry is cruel. So cruel is a combination of happy and angry, etc. So so here you see 21, I believe, but you can boil it down to 6. And then you may view the rest as combinations of pairwise of components. So that would be one answer to your question, but how to do it sometimes it's not as easy as this, I can show you.
First, I just want to thank you for the great talk. It's really fascinating to see. I think you break down the sort of the human aspects of annotation. I think sometimes we can think of it as a robotic task, but human psychology can play a big role. But then there's also parallels, I think, too, between humans and robots almost in some of these tasks. And I guess maybe playing off a parallel. You were talking about breaking down some of these tasks into sort of micro tasks to increase the, I guess, quality of the labels that the annotators are going to give you. But I imagine that breaking down larger tasks into smaller tasks might, add more time, and more time would add more cost to actually getting the annotations. Sort of in a similar way of building more and bigger models to get you the higher quality classification of your machine learning model, but it's going to increase the time and cost. And so I'm wondering if there's been, any cost benefit analyses to breaking down these tasks, smaller tasks, and if some of these sort of strategies that you've been getting at, some of them maybe are more beneficial or less beneficial, and what the cost of those.
So the answer is yes, you find papers of that sort. Now, whether those papers give you, like the example I showed you, whether they give you an overall philosophy of how to do it, I think what I told you is more or less what people have figured out, which is you don't want to give a complex task where people would feel overwhelmed, because then you get garbage data. So somehow it's all about not getting garbage data somehow, right? And so you want to give a task that is meaningful, but where you know that people are going to give you good data, and it gives you a springboard for the next task. And you try to pay attention not to have unnecessary tasks being carried out, and so only in the places or locations, whatever, where there is a need of a box, you want to show that picture to the human if possible. And so,
I guess it could be definitely a case sensitive and depending on task.
yeah. So it's a bit of a craft, if you will, to think of, yeah. And,
Thank you.
yeah.
I have a flip side of that question. In the last 5 years,
What's the factor?
So like in 2018, there was a paper that was published talking about how the average hourly wage is $2.
Yeah.
While the average person getting on jobs is paying $11 an hour.
Right.
So the high or other people were paying less, while much less. You
Right.
find that
There's a race to the bottom, you say, and then look at your out of that, right? So, yeah, so I saw papers claiming that there was not a huge, so the difference is whether you can recruit people to your class. So if you offer a lot, the rumor will spread because there are some laws or cases that people post, oh, this is class, and so people would come to your class and we work harder throughout the law. The quality was only minimally affected by how much you pay. So it feels like people go to their feet and don't take contact with day-to-day people, but if they engage in the class, then you can say, well, engage in the class, and they would. Which is a little bit surprising, but that's really not.
were any advice for other people who are like use their option jobs?
Yeah, so if you look, okay, so there is a sense of a minimum wage in the US, which is I think $7.50. So in the US, you typically go for 12, 15, something like that. So I do the task myself, I time myself, and I see how long it takes, and then I divide by the hour, and so I decide how much to pay. Now, if you spread it around the world, you don't know what's the typical wage and the cost of living in around the world. So that's a little bit more of a particular time, right? Which I don't estimate a little bit. But yeah, you try to be fair. Also, depending on how much you feel like your particular experiment is beneficial to humanity, you may say, well, if people want to do it since it's beneficial, they help the world. And I don't have money to pay them, but that we have earned coins. Yeah.
Especially along those lines, like in my personal experience, when you work with a technical church, you have to put so much effort into catching people who are trying to game the system, which is like, I have no judgment on someone who's trying to game the system. Like they have no personal motivation to be doing necessarily any of these tasks. They're trying to make money. And so they will try to figure out how to do the least amount of work and still somehow not get booted off the task. You're spending so much time and effort, like trying to come up with these systems that like work around and like try to catch people who you shouldn't trust and like do all this stuff and then the data quality is very difficult to guarantee. And you can use all these systems, like it works, but it's a very complex problem. After like doing a lot of this, engaging a lot of this, and I actually know Grant and I have talked about this, he feels the same way. I have now completely pivoted to hiring experts and paying them very well to give me a smaller, very clean set of data. Particularly for evaluation and things like fine tuning, because in the end, like I just find like it's been much more bang for my buck to like get a set of experts and pay them well. And then I'm also more and more likely to not try to sort of game this system of like trying to pay people as little as possible. And I actually just try to find or like go through annotation companies that do a lot of like good quality control, but then guarantee a certain wage for their employees. Because I actually have pretty strong ethical concerns with some of like the wage race to the bottom stuff with things like mechanical turk, like these like open call crowdsourced things. It's a very complicated thing. As there was more and more money in it, it's become more and more sort of likely to exploit people.
Yeah, there are many reputable sites now, and each one of them has their own recipe on how to whitelist or blacklist potential annotators in order to find they're doing a good job.
But you just pay $20, $25 an hour to like 20 experts. for a couple weeks versus like paying a lot of people a lot less to get a lot worse quality data that then you have to do all of this algorithmic fixes to try to make good quality data.
I think that answers kind of my follow-up questions, like what's the advantages of both. Actually, got also brings up this final question is, do you think Amazon or these websites in general will ever at some point try to put a stop to this race to the bottom?
I think they're all trying. And, because you get, I mean, you see that startup help you, if you look at some site, you get garbage, nations. And so, why would you waste your time? Right, and so, I think they're all trying to do a good job in selecting, motivating, training, and annotators. And they have different formulas for that. Like there is one, I talk to them, it's German, and they do work in India. For example, they target women who have no job outside the home, or something like that. And they give a living wage to these women so they become financially independent through work that can do while their children are in school. So some are very clear about social mission. Another one is experimenting with hiring autistic children, because some of them have a lot of attention. And once they get the task, which may take a little bit longer, but then they can do some useful work, basically earn money instead of not earning. So that's another one. Yeah, so yeah, just look around and see how many of them explain to you how to hire the annotators and how they teach them.
I have a lot of, you guys are probably, like, it's much more like a lot of ecology projects already have a sense of like crowdsourcing or like community science or citizen science. And platforms like Zooniverse are potentially a very good resource for you, where, you know, you're actually